On the 12th of October 1972, a small chartered aircraft took off from Uruguay, South America. This aircraft was headed for Santiago, the capital of Chile, carrying some tall and broad rugby players. There were about 45 passengers in total, including some of the players' family and friends who had tagged along. This flight was not expected to be long. Usually, the flight from Uruguay to Santiago takes only about 3 hours. However, on the way, the passengers would encounter a huge Andes Mountains. The Andes mountain range in South America is the world's longest mountain range, and it contains some of the highest mountains on earth, second only to the Himalayas. On that faithful day, October 12th, due to the storm, the plane couldn't continue its journey. The pilots decided to land midway and attempt to fly again the next day. They landed in Mendoza, Argentina for the night. The following day, October 13th, the plane took off again at 12:18 pm. The pilots ensured that the weather had cleared up and the flight was smooth for the next hour. At 3:21 pm, the pilots began their descent. The plane was quite close to Santiago but was still within the mountainous region, as the city itself is surrounded by high peaks. During the descent, sudden turbulence hit the plane, causing it to shake violently. Clouds gathered around the plane, covering all visibility. Alarms sound in the plane and warning lights began to flash, leaving the passengers confused. During nervous laughter and jokes, one passenger looked out of the window and saw the clouds clearing up. However, he also noticed that the plane was dangerously close to a mountain. As soon as the aircraft emerged from the clouds, the pilots realized they were headed directly for a massive rock. In a panic, they attempted to gain altitude to clear the mountain, but it was too late. The rear of the aircraft collided with the mountain as they ascended. The entire rear portion of the plane was torn away, and 2 rows of the seats, along with 3 passengers, were ejected from the plane and disappeared. The plane continued to ascend for a few more seconds before it abruptly began to fall. After a brief period, another collision occurred, resulting in the breaking of the left wing. More passengers were ejected from the plane. Only the front portion of the plane remained, and it ultimately crashed into a glacier. The aircraft slid down the glacier at a speed of 350 kilometers per hour before crashing again after a 700-meter drop. The entire plane was destroyed and the passenger seats were torn apart from the plane's base. The cockpit was completely crushed, resulting in the immediate deaths of the pilot. The broken aircraft came to a rest on an unknown mountain in the Andes at an altitude of 3,570 meters. Remarkably, out of the 45 people on board, 33 survived the crash. The painful story of survival was just beginning for these individuals. Following the crash, 2 survivors who weren't seriously injured emerged. The first was a 19-year-old Roberto and the other was a 20-year-old Gustav. Both were medical students and they immediately began checking the survivors and offering medical assistance. Many passengers had suffered severe injuries, and one of the passengers, a 23-year-old Fernando, was in coma due to skull fracture. 2 medical students did their best to help the injured passengers. Meanwhile, just an hour after the plane's disappearance, the Chilean Air Search and Rescue Service received a notification. They dispatched 4 aircraft to search the survivors and the crash site. Despite searching from dusk until night, they couldn't locate the crash site. The rescue service officers concluded, after hearing radio transmissions, that the aircraft must have crashed in a remote and inaccessible area. On the night of October 13th, the remaining passengers remained hopeful, believing that they could endure the cold night. Someone could find them the next day. Tragically, the injured passenger didn't survive the frigid night, reducing the number of survivors from 33 to 28. The survivors used the remains of the aircraft to create shelter using luggage, seats, and snow to seal the rear section of the plane and stay warm inside. The survivors tried various methods to signal for help, including writing SOS with lipstick on the plane's roof and attempting to create a large cross in the snow with suitcases. Unfortunately, these efforts were in vain. Over the course of few days, they saw multiple aircraft flying over them and attempting to signal for help by waving and shouting, but they were unsuccessful. Another day passed, and on October 15th, the survivors realized that they needed water to survive. Passenger Fito found a way to obtain water by using a metal sheet as a solar collector to melt the snow to collect water droplets in empty wine bottles. In addition to this, many passengers utilized seat cushions as snowshoes, and the wool from the seat covers provided some insulation from the extreme cold. Most of the passengers on the ill fated flight were from coastal areas and had never encountered snow before. Now they found themselves in the bitter cold of minus 30 degrees at a high altitude with limited food and water, all while trying to survive. In these harsh conditions, they also faced another challenge, snow blindness, which occurs when the sun's ultraviolet rays reflect on the snow and ice, damaging the eyes. These survivors had only 3 pairs of sunglasses to protect their eyes from snow blindness. On October 21st, after 8 days of searching, the search and rescue team gave up their efforts. They believed that with no signs of survivors found during that time, the chances of anyone surviving were slim. Consequently, the search operation was officially terminated after 142 hours of searching. As food supplies reduced, the survivors began rationing their already meager resources. Some even resorted to attempting to eat parts of the plane, like the cotton from the seats and leather. However, this only worsened their condition, making them even sicker. With no other option and with food supplies completely exhausted on October 29th, 16 days after the crash, the survivors made an unimaginable decision to consume the flesh of their deceased friends and family. This decision was far from easy, as many of the deceased were friends, classmates, family members, or relatives. As the idea came from Roberto, he was the first one to try it. Though others initially refused, 2 days later, faced with no other resource, they too decided to eat human flesh to stay alive. Tragedy continued to plague the survivors as on December 11th, 59 days after the crash, an avalanche struck. 3 more survivors perished in the snow. At this point, only 16 remained. On November 15th, 33 days after the crash, 3 of the survivors decided to set out in search of help. Their aim was to walk west, as they believed they were only few kilometers away from reaching Chile's countryside. However, their estimation proved to be significantly incorrect. In reality, the crash site was 89 kilometers to the east, deep into the Andes Mountains. Unaware of this, they walked for several days until they reached the highest peak of the mountain. When they reached the summit, they were greeted by a heart-wrenching sight, mountains and snow-covered peaks as far as eye could see in all directions. Overcoming their initial shock, they finally spotted 2 distant mountain peaks without snow on the western horizon. They presumed that traveling in that direction would lead them to safety. They could see no end to their journey because they had little to no food. One of the persons decided to return to the crash site, and only the other two would go ahead, so the less food was needed. On 15th of December, he started going back, which was easier because it was all downhill. He used an aircraft seat as a sleigh, and within an hour he reached the crash site. It took 3 days to climb this mountain, but in just 1 hour he was back at the crash site. The other two kept climbing the mountain. Finally, they reached a valley where they could see a river flowing. In this situation, reaching the river was a great relief because while traveling downstream the river, it was easy to find a downhill path. They kept on walking, and finally, after trekking for 9 days, on the 20th of December, they could find some presence of humans. They could see some cows in the fields. They were so tired by this point that they couldn't walk further. Right then, on the other side of the river, they saw 3 men on horses. Parado tried to shout, but the river was so loud that those people couldn't hear him. But by chance, one of them spotted Parado and Canessa. He looked at them and shouted back, "Tomorrow." He said that he would be back the next day. The next day, the man came back on horseback and this time bought some paper and pencils with him. He attached the paper and pencil to a stone with a thread and threw it on the other side of the river. For the first time, Parado had an opportunity to send his message to the world. Parado wrote in Spanish on the paper, "I came from the plane that fell in the mountains." On the other hand, the person who received this message was a farmer from Chile. He read this note and told him with gestures that he understood. They wouldn't believe that there were survivors of a 2-month-old plane crash. They were still so far from any village or human settlement. Finally, when he reached the nearest city, the army command was informed about this and he contacted the army headquarters in Santiago. It was found that on sheer will they had hiked 61 kilometers on foot over the last 10 days. Kenesa had lost half of his body weight. He weighted only 44 kgs then. On the 22nd of December 1972, 70 days after the crash, 2 search and rescue helicopters finally reached the survivors to save their lives. In total, 16 survivors were rescued. They were in terrible condition: altitude sickness, dehydration, broken bones, malnutrition, but all of them recovered. The story is a lesson to the world about hope. If you have decided to do something and you have the patience and humanity, then nothing is impossible. If you want, you can achieve things that you can never ever dream of. As they say, where there is a will, there is a way. That's it for today. This is Shayog signing off.